So let's get started.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And
So I'm just going to read off.
Oh, I have the questions over to the side.
Yeah.
So glancing, that is why.
Okay. So I'm just going to start off. So your bio says you're a social justice participant, both personally and professionally. Can you tell me a little bit about your efforts in both areas?
Yes. So I think your first and your second question kind of dabble. I openly identify as Black because I can't separate myself from those things. I openly identify as a woman. I acknowledge that I'm a cisgender woman, but in the society, in a patriarchal, racist society, unfortunately, people who share identities very similar to me have experienced the most oppression. Social justice is rooted in equality, but also pushing it a step further into equity. So in my personal and professional life, walking in these identities, I have no choice but to kind of stand in the front of any of the things that socially, politically, or economically stand in the face of me and others who share these identities from succeeding. We'd be remiss to think that our society and country, our country by design, was not built on some bad practices in race and patriarchy. And I have to walk through a lot of systems that were never designed for me to succeed. So personally, I feel it at a very deep level that my life and others who share identities with me depend on me being vocal about my experience and also moving the needle forward in systems. And that goes into education later, but into systems that were not designed to support, uplift, or even see any positive outcomes for people that identify in similar ways as me. I also am realizing like we all share intersections with other people. So my plight or my oppression that I feel is no different, is different in a way, but it does not separate me from the oppression of others. And that is important to me in my professional work. So if I am working with students of adverse identities who have experienced oppression, whether it be in, we often talk about race, and I've talked about race and gender, but if it is in religious expression, if it is in identity expression, I also have some place in making sure that the things that I can control and the systems that I work in are better for them. And at some point, hopefully, equitable for them. You got to work with what you got in most cases, because I didn't build this system and it's not going to be on my back to break down these systems. But from where I sit, I have a very privilege, and I realize that as a privilege. Education is a privilege, and obtaining a level of education is a privilege to make sure that other people's journeys aren't as hard as mine. Or aren't hard in their own very real ways that I will never experience, but I know are hard. Like a lot of social justice boils down to common sense. If you wouldn't want it being done to you, very much so. Golden rule, do as to others. Like if you wouldn't want it being done to you, how do you make a situation better for somebody else so that they also don't have to experience this? So it guides my personal decisions every day. It guides my professional decisions and why I choose to work in spaces in higher ed that do address these things, because they're not fun. They're not fun. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to engage in this. Nobody wants to hold the peace where they might have harmed somebody else. And we've all done it. But that's the work that needs to be done in order forward and make sure that these systems are more equal in a very social justice way, but more equitable, because we realize equality in this society, like we weren't built that way. So it may not happen, but we can figure out the gaps and kind of work in those.
Yeah. That was an awesome response. That was, great.
No problem.
Has there ever been a time where you felt like undermined or underestimated because because you were like a woman or Black or a person of color?
Every single day, every single day. Being uh, me being in spaces is a radical statement in itself, right? And it's hard to explain, and that's not even explain. It's hard to teach when you are feeling the burden of oppression, right? So I am in a unique role in most of the places that I've worked where I have also been charged, just like most women are charged with teaching others, and most oppressed people are charged with teaching others, to teach others how to not undermine me and other people. And it's hard. It's hard. I will tell you this right now. I am sitting here in front of you, 31 years old, right? 21-year-old me did not have the tact approach those things, or the emotional maturity to approach some of those things in a way that I value as an educator, as I'm an administrator, but I work in education. Really, if you're working in education, that means you have to have the patience of a saint and also be willing to engage with people who have different views, in the hopes that some thought will come out that might change behavior or change thought or even shift it a little bit. So I walk that fine line every single day of my life, just because I'm in spaces where sometimes people have never experienced a person like me. And I'll give you an example. So when I was in grad school, I went to graduate school at Virginia Tech. I had a colleague, and bless his heart, Sam, was from, I think Wisconsin, University of Madison, Wisconsin, yes. So from Wisconsin. And I did not go directly to grad school after I graduated undergrad. I did a year of service with AmeriCorps, working in West Baltimore City in communities that were involved in the juvenile justice system. So individuals, kids who are involved in the juvenile justice system, ages 8 to 18, and families. And I, too, my brother, when he was young, 16, was wrapped up in the justice system. So I also am somebody who's been involved in the justice system via my brother. That left me to different life experiences. Colleague Sam came straight from college, and he grew up in Wisconsin. And he admitted on a couple of occasions that he had never been in educational spaces with Black people. And that he just didn't know some of the things he didn't know. And we were learning about a theory that was talking about how you get to this place of like this plateau of knowing and consciousness where you realize everything is wrong, like things are wrong, like society has some flaws, right? And he was like, oh, I get it. So Martin Luther King thought that, the way that Black people were treated was wrong. And I was like, Sam, yes. And all the people who were enslaved, I'm sure, thought that slavery was wrong. And we had a dialogue, and I think people in that setting, because I said something that was true, what slave do you think was like, yeah, slavery? Nobody. Nobody who's an enslaved person would think that. And in a dialogue in the class, and initially they thought that I was being aggressive, and I was like, no, I'm just telling you a fact. Martin Luther King in the 1950s wasn't the first person to have this thought that separate but equal was not right, or that the way that Black people were treated in this country for just centuries, like 400 years, was just cool. And it wasn't an attack, but again, coming into the classroom in these identities, there is an assumption, just because of stereotypes and things that people have either not experienced or just seen. That was the angle I was coming from. And it's like, it's a fine line that you always have to walk, but it's also one that you have to walk unabashedly. Because me as a Black person, I'm like, Martin Luther King walked the first. He wasn't the first person to reach this plateau of understanding. And I had to, bring him in. Like, we have your Sojourner Truths. We have your Mary McLeod Bethunes. You have your Frederick Douglasses, who hundreds of years predecessed Martin Luther King. It's just at that point in evaluation of our government and our laws we were trying to push for radical change, which wasn't really that radical. And we're still here trying to push for radical change, which isn't really that radical. To answer your question, every day, and in every scenario, it is hard, but it comes up and it's hard, but it's one that I willfully entertain because it means a better quality of life for me and others.
Right. Thank you. That was such a good answer.
No problem.
That kind of addresses our first 3 questions that we have. Just covers all of that.
Well, yeah, I did want to say something about the education field.
Yeah.
And it inspired me to enter the field. So like many young women, they're like, oh, you're the smart girl. And you get wrapped up in that identity of being smart, right? And when you're smart, school then becomes the pathway for you, right? If you are smart, school is your pathway. If you're athletic, people gonna put you in sports. So I had been told all my life, you're just so smart. You're just so smart. And I fed into that. And a lot of what I was feeding into, I think, were the wrong things about education, when really like the credentialing, really credentials, they mean something to others. What you know is what you know, and nobody can take that away from you. And I really had to evaluate what it was. So it started at that seed of you're smart, and now I've kind of evolved to realize I am a philomate, a lover of learning. I love to learn. And the easiest place to engage with other people who love to learn and have some different world perspectives, I found we're in education systems. I love engaging in conversation. I love hearing people's thoughts. I love learning something new. Literally, the LeVar Burton, the more you know, that is my favorite gift to use every single time. And it's because I really enjoy learning. So the field of education felt like a beautiful marrying. And then you also have, especially at research institutions, the point of like a liberal art is a thing, and the point of a HBCU is a thing, but the point of a liberal arts, the point of a research institution is to create knowledge. And I love being around the creation of knowledge. So being in higher ed and being in education just like fills all my goodie cups, like all the goodies in my cup, because it's like, yay, I get to be in a space where I can do good, impactful work that does impact other humans who can make, great strides in whatever field. I'm also doing that work, that social justice work, especially in admissions, around making sure people have access and equity to resources in higher education at a space that is resource rich, right? And making sure that they have funding and things like that, that we do get direct control. And I get to advocate for those students who historically may have been looked over in this setting. And then like, lastly, I just get to engage in those conversations on a daily, and it's always something new to find out. And I love it. I worked in nonprofit for a little stint, and it was cool, and it gave me a lot to think. I learned to think about it, and I learned a lot about design thinking, and that's a way of thinking and a way of problem solving. But that genuine engagement just in knowledge and other people's lived experience, education is the best place for that. If you are one of those people, then it becomes just like your playground when you get to be in a field where it's always something changing and people are always finding out something new, and you get to have these challenging conversations with people, and then you get to put it into your work, because learning stuff is nothing if you don't put it into practice. So you get to really engage in that and redesign some stuff and have those challenging conversations. So I did want to say, like, I started off being the smart girl, but I feel like I've evolved in the very Super Saiyan. Like I'm at Super Saiyan, probably not for real because I'm still a mess, but I've gotten to the point where I realize that I am a lover of learning, and the educational space is a wonderful place if you enjoy learning for the sake of learning.
That's awesome. That makes me so happy that you were able to find a career that like fits all your cups or fills all your buckets.
It works, and it works my nerves at times, but it's definitely the best place for me.
That's awesome. So can you tell me on that note what you enjoy most about being a dean? Is it the learning and engaging in the conversations, or is there something
So I love that part for being in the field, but being a dean specifically, and I am fortunate enough to work at the second oldest school in the country, William and Mary, and that means we got old roots, old, long, jacked up, gnarly roots, right? I enjoy working at this institution as a dean in admission because I get to advocate for those students who have historically been bypassed by the institution or by higher ed. You think about the creation of historically Black colleges and universities, it was because there was no access to places like William and Mary. With the abundance of resources, they were the first to get a charter in this country from England. Harvard got there first with like starting and moving, but William and Mary was the first to get a charter. So just think about that. I get to advocate for students who have been underrepresented, and the caveat of my title is diversity and access. I really do get to help in the process of making sure students have access to some of the best resources in the country. And that's the part that I like the most. When you read a student's essay and you see that they're capable, but then you realize systemically, right, these students have been in an education system that has been underfunded, right? I used to live in Baltimore, so I'll use Baltimore as an example. Baltimore in the state of Maryland has been historically underfunded as a city, right, in the way of education. And you see that this kid, despite being in an education system that's underfunded, and I've worked in Baltimore City schools, and you know what they deal with. You also know, just in general, Baltimore is a beautiful place, and it's a thriving place, and I love the community in Baltimore, and but it has its number of challenges, and these students have faced all those challenges and made A's and B's and have been doing AP courses or IB courses or whatever's offered in their class, and they're kicking butt. But at the looking at standardized testing, they're still testing low. And I get to say, listen, that student did the best at their school. So they deserve to be here because they are top 10% of their school. And our classes typically average 75 to 80% of top 10% of students nationally, right? So pool of students are academically astute. They're extremely intellectually curious, and to look at the SAT as the only determining factor, which we don't, but you know, sometimes you have to say those things to colleagues, like this SAT score does not deter from the GPA, the hard work, the extracurriculars, the things that the student has done. And then their essay was just dope. Like, let's go ahead and do this and pull that trigger. And that's the thing. It's not a hard argue because I do work with the staff that understands that, but being able to do that work is so important, especially as y'all are rising seniors. You're going to know you're going to be applying to schools, and you're hoping that somebody is reading your application with the TLC, the tender love and care that it deserves, because it's not just a piece of paper. There's a human attached to this piece of paper, and you want to make sure that you give that human the due diligence and the time. At William and Mary, each application gets read at least, we say at least twice, but I say it's at least 3 times, and it's read by one dean staff member, then your regional dean, so somebody who understands the context of your school, somebody who understands the context of your state, and they can say, this student will do well here, can do well here, has proven that they will do well here. Let's let them in and make this class that much better because their voice is represented. We have to be like, that's the work that I get the most joy from, because it's the work that's meaningful. Students, again, can't have a dynamic educational environment if everybody thinks the same and everybody has experienced the same thing. And I'll tell you, I've read a lot of essays where kids read the exact same swimming team, same volleyball, same even, you'd be surprised, same even, this is what, there was a prompt last year that was like, I guess from a different school, but a lot of kids use this as their extra essay for William and Mary. Tell us about the things on your wall. Surprisingly, a lot of people got the same things on their wall. And and on paper, a lot of these students look a lot alike in those areas that admissions officers look at. But at William and Mary, because we are looking for deeper, it's like, okay, yeah, same Thrasher shirt in the closet, same this on the wall, same that on the wall. But there is something different about the student because they represent something different, or they've had a different lived experience, or they're going to bring a different thought to the classroom that's going to make the other students that much sharper because they've gotten a chance to experience that and deal with that and manage that and then put that into practice. So I think that's the most fulfilling part to me, is to see where that comes out and like how you're crafting a unique class of 1,500 people, which doesn't sound like that unique, but it's an intimate size class in comparison to most schools. An intimate class of 1,500 people that are going to challenge each other and make each other better, like with intention.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was so like wrapped up in what you were saying and everything.
Do you think there's some racial bias on some admission committees, as like if they don't have any Black people or people of color, like reading your applications, do you think there is some degree of racial bias at like higher up universities?
So I'm hesitant to walk into that. I don't know where I don't work, right? And people hold their own personal bias and they bring them with them wherever they go. Bias is kind of like eyebrows, like everybody got some and we carry them on our face, and they change sometimes depending on what you've heard, what you've experienced. So I would say yes, because we all hold our own personal bias. And if you don't have a diversity of voices in a room, it's easier for us to lean into the knowns versus the unknowns. I think it's a study out there that like people hire people who look like them. So of course, people are admitting people who look like them or who remind them of themselves without those checks and balances. And like I said, I'm fortunate to work in an office where diversity and access work is center. I'm fortunate to work at a university where we have made very clear goals and are moving towards those goals around making sure that our community is diverse and equitable, and all those students have place, space, and voice in the community and are part of the community. But I don't want to say yes, I don't work there, but I would assume that the answer would be yes if it is very homogenous in the office, or if people have not experienced things. Like my colleague Sam, he didn't know. He didn't know. So, sometimes you can't fault people. But again, we're in educational spaces, so I expect you to know better because we all got access to the same information. So I can only imagine that it does happen. And where it is happening, if federal regulations and other goals of the institution aren't stopping it, then it is a willful thing that they're engaging in, and it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's so true.
Yeah.
I wish I could say more, but I don't know to say more.
Yeah. So your bio also says that you currently serve on the diversity and access team to support the execution of Sneak Peek and Autumn Blast. So can you tell us a little bit about what those programs are and what they do?
Yes, so Sneak Peek and Autumn Blast are two diversity and access programs that specifically target our communities. And it's interesting that you asked me about this, because we are just now talking about what does this look like come the fall. Who can we engage with more? Sneak Peek was originally our yield program. So after students had applied and were admitted, this was a special program for students who are identified in our SHEV underrepresented groups. So that's your Black, your Latinx, Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific Islander, but not all Asian communities, because at William and Mary, they aren't necessarily all all national identities are underrepresented within the Asian community. Our Native individuals, and then we also have been shifting, well, those are the Chev ones, and then we've been shifting to include our first generation students, because they are underrepresented at a very old university with a lot of legacy and ties, right? And also our transfer students have like different, but also being a transfer student at a traditional 4-year institution is a different experience. It's a very different experience. So that was our programming, where we introed students to resources that were specifically for them on the campus. Things that they might need to know, especially if their parents had not engaged in college before. You don't know what you don't know about college till you get there. And you've experienced it a couple of times. So it was kind of greasing the wheels for those students to feel comfortable enough to want to come. And now Autumn Blast on the other end is our programming that engages rising seniors and juniors to just introduce them to William and Mary, who are within those groups that have been historically underrepresented, to community. So introducing them to student organizations and programming, introducing them to offices like our Center for Diversity on the campus, or if you're an LGBTQ student, introducing you to the resources there, or if you're of different religion and spiritual faith, showing you those things that are there for you, to build community and to feel like you belong. We use very big, we're always saying you belong. We want students to feel like they belong. And sometimes you just need to be shown the things for you to figure out where you belong. So those programs are there for that. And now we're reimagining it, because resources and funding used to limit us because they were overnight one was a drive-in program. So if you're driving in, you have to be able to get there. And Williamsburg isn't hard to get to, but if you don't have a car or your parents don't have a vehicle, that's difficult. You also have to be able to stay overnight. So like all these things, funding was a big issue. So now we're able to kick the cap off that joint and provide these resources virtually to students who may have traditionally not been able to get there. Our rural students who live in the rural parts of Virginia that just can't come from the other side of the state to visit for a couple of hours. Now we can invite them, and we can have those students here, or students for whatever reason couldn't make it. Now we get the opportunity to reach more in a unique way. So I'm excited. Keep an eye out for what's coming. I really would like to change up programming, because I love William and Mary. It's very historical, but I think it's time for a little shakeup, and I'm dramatic in my programming. So I'm gonna try and do the most from a distance, because I would have done the most from in your face. So just working on those programs, but they're really geared towards making sure that we have that representation in our application pool, and then that representation in our class.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm sorry, I should have lit a candle out here. It's a bunch of flies.
All good. Ashwathi, do you have a question?
No, you can continue with your questions. I'm trying to think of a question for her.
What is one thing you like me and others to know about you and your work?
What is one thing I need others to know about me and my work? That was the one I didn't have an answer for, and that the work is ongoing. I think that's the thing. The work is ongoing. To know about me, to know me, and I mentioned this, 21-year-old me was not 18-year-old me. And 30-year-old me, or 30-year-old me was not early, mid, or nor late 20s me. The work is ongoing, and I think I would like people to know that this is a journey, and that I'm never going to get it right. Nobody should expect perfect from anyone, but work is work. It's going to continue. And not that it's a bad thing. It's something that I willfully engage in, and that I do genuinely love to do, but it's ongoing. and I'm ever changing and ever learning, and not to be tethered. And I think that's the thing. In the world of social media, I think we tether ourselves to images of people. And if you allow people the space to grow, learn, and evolve, you'll be able to enjoy the journey and get something out of the person in a different way than if you hold them to a one image in your mind. And I think about that oftentimes when you think about parents. I think we view our parents in a certain way. And as you get older, you start to examine some of the things that your parents did. And you also have to realize, like, your parents did the best they could, oftentimes, with what they had. And that's because the work is always going. Your child is always growing. You're always learning something new. And to give grace around, like, who I am and what it is that I'm doing today, and that the work is going to continue, and it's also going to continue whether I'm a part of the conversation or not.
Yeah. Did it take you a long time to figure out like a job that you liked? Like, did you go through multiple jobs before landing here and realizing, wow, like I really like this job?
That is a great question. And yes, I think a lot of people, a lot of my peers, especially being from like people in Black and brown communities, the reason you go to college is to get a job, and not just any job, a job that pays well. So I was also indoctrinated into that thought, and I realized that the things that might have paid me well weren't filling me up in a way and making me feel whole in a way and happy in what I could be doing. So I my first degree is in political science. I love to talk. I hate to argue. That's why I'm always willing to engage in a conversation. But at the point where we are coming to argument, I'm done. So I realized that politics were not the avenue for me. And that doesn't mean that I didn't love policy. I love looking at rules and what's written and how do we change these things and where are they impacting people in real life. And I just had to figure out where to marry those things. So like I said, after I graduated, I did a year of service with AmeriCorps, working for a university, but I was in a community engagement unit that was working in the community. So very rarely while I was doing my year of service did I even touch the campus. And it wasn't until the end of my year when I was like, okay, girl, you got to figure out what you're doing next. I went and had lunch with one of my mentors, Natasha Williams. She works at Morgan State University, and she worked in student affairs. And I brought her lunch because I knew better before I started asking her 50 questions. And I asked, I was like, what is this called that you do? Like, what do you do here? Like, I know you've done a lot, and she's been influential to people for like the last decade, working in higher education and student programming. And she gave me some of my first opportunity to really imagine what programming could look like for students that would impact them for life. And she was like, this is student affairs and this is what I do and I have a degree in it. And I was like, well, you got a degree in this. Is that required? And she was like, in some cases, because again, credentialing is not about what you know, it's what other people believe you know, based off this alphabet behind your name. She introduced me to student affairs, and that kind of changed my life. And then it was this evolution of where in student affairs do I fit? So I always knew that diversity and access was something of importance to me. But when I was in grad school, I was a student, graduate assistant for the international office, and where I feel definitely, especially in light of recent things, like international students have a place in the space at American institutions just like everybody else. And I learned the nuances of that, and I learned some of the systems behind that, but I realized that wasn't necessarily where I fit, right? Doing front-facing programming. Then that moved on. I was working with a diversity center at Tech, and then I got to the graduate school where I did some admission work, where I gave these fabulous driving tours. If you read it in my bio,
Yeah,
You don't got to walk. You just drive people around in the van. But gave these driving tours to a place that I didn't feel any connection to, but it did help ground people's connection to the institution. So I was doing recruitment for diverse students and things like that. And I realized that's a part of what I can do, but it wasn't what I liked. It wasn't until I was about 7 years, and I've done like I said, I've done diversity programming, student-facing programming. I've worked in fraternity and sorority life, which I love. I love fraternity and sorority life. It is such a fun place to develop students and to work with students who want to do good, but oftentimes they just need a little guidance on how to do good. And then I worked in development, so fundraising. And it wasn't until I jumped out of higher ed to work at a nonprofit, like full time, I realized like higher ed was it for me. But the change was I had done all the student facing work in my early years, and I realized it wasn't giving me joy. So I recruit for New York and South Carolina, and that's a part of what I can do. You see, I like to talk. I can entertain, I can engage. Like I said, sorority and fraternity life, recruitment, I know how to do it, but it wasn't for me. I'm really strong in the background, operations, putting stuff together. When you're talking about systems change, how are we changing the systems? We're not just changing the programs, but how are we changing the system that students have to go through? So working in admissions was like a good fit because I get to be behind the scenes, I get to read your application, I get to advocate for you, and then there's only a portion of my time where I am required to be on. I realized, again, as that smart girl, people always put me in the front of things because I could talk. Didn't mean I always enjoyed it. I've always had really bad stage fright, surprisingly. And being put in front of things, especially when I knew I could, but it wasn't for me, has always been a conflict. And it took me to be like 30 to resolve that and say, it's okay if you work in the background, Jack. It's okay if you do the work and let somebody else be in the front, because you don't really enjoy it anyway. You get flushed, you get nervous, you get anxious. That's not what you want. You want to prepare the things so that the people who do get joy or naturals at that or whatever have that place to do the work, and your part of the work might be in the background. So I like admission, and I like that I finally got here, because I will tell you, there were so many nights where I was like, you love working with students, but I'm not sure this is the way that you're supposed to be working with students all the time. The first 3 months that I worked, my first full-time job out of grad school, I worked every single weekend for the first 3 months, every single weekend. And it was a lot of FaceTime with students, and I love my students, and they're all doing bigger and better, but I was like, this is draining in a way that is not sustainable for me. Yeah. And I had to figure it out. And it was a professional in higher ed, my dear mentor, Dr. Sharika Adams, who was like, you need to write your pros and cons out and figure out who you are as a professional right now and what it is you need from your professional space. And once I did that negotiating and crying and all that stuff with myself, I came to the conclusion. But it took me like 8 to 10 professional years of work to get there. Yeah.
I want to go into the medical field, so I don't know how many like jobs I can experiment with like that, but hopefully like I can do jobs along the way. But that's really, really cool that you found somewhere you like.
Intern, ask for practical experience, do research, any aspect of the medical field that you think you'd be interested, just dip your toe in the lake. That's all I did. And a lot of people are willing to give you opportunity to work beside, even if it isn't your primary function, because they probably need help too. It's not easy. It's not easy. But I encourage like trying it all out, and then if nothing fits, write down what fits for you and try and figure out where the spaces intersect in the work that you want to be doing. Because admission, this job intersected both of my interests in higher ed as well as diversity and access work. and in a very nice way that I don't think I had been intentionally looking for until I wrote it out. And I was like, this is what I want. Now I got to find what I want.
Right.
It came up. It came up.
That's awesome. It's awesome that it's like, it's so fulfilling for you. I can just tell that you really were able to find something that really, again, suits all your interests and your needs. And that's really awesome. Do you have any advice for people? Like, I'm not sure what I want to do in the future, like at all. Like, I have no idea. Do you have any advice on that?
So again, I think it's one of those things, figure out the things that give you joy. And that will also sustain the life that you would like. Because we have to be real. We have to be real, right? So I work in education, knowing good and well that education is underfunded on all levels. Higher education, we do get a little bit more leeway in terms of salary, but I am working in a field that fulfills me, and I know that money will come just from experience. Just like you don't know everything when you're young, with age, it'll come. It'll come. You're going to learn more. I would encourage you just to really do some introspection. And anyone who doesn't know, do some introspection and figure out the things that you love and where you need to be doing those things you love. So I'm an artist, right? I love to draw. And at first I was like, I'm going to go into graphic design when I go to college, right? Took maybe a week of an art class and started asking some questions. What's the expected time of art graduates? Because people in this class have been at the college for 8 years. And I don't got 8 years. I don't have 8 years to give to undergraduate study. And that determined at that point in time that I needed to shift. I also had credits from high school in political science and art that got transferred over in political science and art. And I said, you know what? You do have a love for understanding why things work and how things work. And maybe political science was it. Got a whole degree in political science, and the only part that I lean on is policy and understanding politics, right? Because every place has politics, and I think that's a good foundation. But then I had to go back to the drawing board. I think also never resign yourself to evolving, and never resign yourself to really asking yourself, what do you need right now, and what's going to fulfill you? So now I do art on the side. Like I paint when the spirit of paint takes over me. I draw when I feel compelled to draw. And it's not something that's tethered to my livelihood, which I like. I enjoy working in education for all the reasons, but I also enjoy working in education for just the practical reasons of I have benefits. I had to get my wisdom teeth taken out last week, and it didn't cost me my arm, my leg, my firstborn child. I appreciated that. That's something that I was also looking for in a professional environment, one where I was not working broke. And I've worked broke. I've worked broke many a times in many positions, and also being willing to be like, this is not working for me, so I need to move on. A lot of people get so tethered to their thought of what they were supposed to be that it becomes detrimental to who they can be. And I think that's the piece. Don't tether yourself to one identity, because you are multifaceted. You are an intersection of a lot of identities and an intersection of a lot of interests. Allow yourself to explore those interests, and then figure out, once you've figured it, all the things that serve you, what you need to be doing. I think a lot of students get tethered too quickly to this idea. I was a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor when I was young. I'm squeamish at the sight of blood. Being a doctor would never work. I could not. The gauze from my wisdom teeth sent me into a panic. It was too much blood. And if I stayed tethered to that idea of when I was a little girl and I used to put Band-Aids on my grandfather, that I was going to be a doctor, I would never be happy. I would never be wealthy, probably, but never be happy. Never be happy. And I try and tell students, you need to prioritize the things that will keep you happy and will also sustain the life that you want to live. Higher ed sustains the life that I want to live. One that I can walk in honestly and walk in my truth. And not that it's not going to be work, but it's one that works for me. And you'll be okay, Sophia. You'll be okay. You need to start doing the inventory of the things. You and anybody else need to just do the inventory of the things. And college is the perfect time to explore all the things with very low stakes. You can be part of every single club that fits your interest. And if you decide like this is more than an interest, this is a profession, then start pivoting into that. Lean into it. Why not? Why not? Don't be scared.
Yeah. Thanks.
Problem.
So what are some, pivoting back to your career, your awesome, amazing career. So what are some obstacles you have faced? Now you've told us a little bit about the journey, and I want to know a little bit more about the roadblocks you may have faced or the potholes.
So the big one that I think I will talk to you, like I'll share, is being young in a professional space. Unfortunately, you're young until you're old. And I still don't understand, but I get the roadblocks there. I worked at my alma mater for undergrad as a dang, I see I pushed it in the back of my mind, as a development officer, working with young and future alumni. And I experienced some real unnecessary nonsense there, but I was the youngest person in the office. And some of the things that I did were cited as inappropriate because I was younger. I would wear the same cardigan, the same slacks as my colleagues. But again, the sense and sensibility of a 65-year-old woman and the sense and sensibility of a 25-year-old woman are a little different, right? And the roadblock of age until you get old was one that I never understood. And that's why I kind of had to untether myself from credentialing, because I had credentials, but nobody cared because I was younger. So I think the politics of age in the workplace was one. Race always comes up, but I'm so used to that. That's like, oh, and today I'm experiencing that. But the age one was the biggest roadblock. And then it also came at the front of students, right? Students, again, posturing. I'm about 2, 3, 4 years max older than some of my students that I was working with in my first professional experience, and establishing those boundaries with students. They're like, well, you're only, but I am liable if something happens to you while we are on this trip to Indiana, where, because you are 21 and legally, but you are a student under my purview, you cannot go and drink. You just can't. I can't have it. And students, at some cases, undermining me because of my age and proximity to them. And proximity to their age. Oh, you're only so much younger. And my favorite student, and I will call him out, D. Bedford, love him to death. But D, for a minute there, thought we were friends. And I had to reiterate, we can be friends when you graduate. When I am not working with you in this capacity, because right now it puts me in a compromise around my livelihood, because you think it's okay to come into my office and take off your pants with my basketball shorts on under it. But like, what are you doing? I don't need anybody coming in here and thinking something is amok, right? And he was like, but you're cool. I know I'm cool, but there's a bathroom for that. You can't come in my office as if we are friends and there aren't boundaries around our age. But I've written D a bunch of recommendation letters, and he works in LA at this private school, and he has a degree in higher ed. So he's gotten his master's and done all the things. But I think that was a challenge that I've always, like, roadblock wise, I've always been like, I'm just not old yet. So I don't know what to do if you don't think I'm capable because I'm not old enough, but time takes time. It's been one of those things where it's always kind of peaked its head, either from the people I serve or from those who I'm working with, as a way to invalidate thought, practice, all that stuff. So that's been one thing that I'm like, I would say that's been a big roadblock that always presents itself. And now as I'm getting older, again, with age, people expect me to have a child. And it's like, I have no children. So I'm entering in that phase of my life where age is peaking up, but it's also peaking up in me being of less value because I don't have a child. And it's like, that's not how that works. You all will experience it, maybe. I hope that you don't have to, but that is a unique roadblock of a professional setting that I don't think enough women, we don't engage enough young women in that conversation about how you are viewed as a young woman is a thing, how you are viewed as an older woman in a workplace is a thing, how you are viewed when you do not have children in a workplace versus when you do have children. And that's also the politics of what's going on now, where people with children have to make some really, really tough decisions. And those of us without children, we are just making tough decisions for ourselves. And workplaces have to accommodate, but also you have to think towards the people who don't have those, like people who don't have kids when this thing all went down in terms of COVID. Some of the people who were tapped upon were the people who don't have kids to fill those spaces where the people who had kids couldn't. And it's like, there is a disparity in your value in me because I didn't bear no children in that too, but different conversation. I would say that's a professional barrier I wish women spoke a lot more about. There are politics around age and children in the workplace that nobody talks about.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. Like, I've never really heard that before. So thanks for talking about it. Something no one really talks about.
That's been my biggest roadblock professionally, trying to figure out where I fit. And as I get older, I think I look young. I don't know, y'all tell me. Still being hit with, just little things, like just little microaggressions that are like, oh, you don't see me as an adult. Got it. Got it. I don't know what to tell you. I'm full adult, but yeah.
Newsflash.
Yeah, just an adult over here. Just an adult over here. And yeah.
Has there ever like really been a time in your professional career where you realize like you're the only Black person in the room or you're the only woman in the room, and like how did that affect you?
So I went to graduate school in Blacksburg, and I always joke that there are no Black people in Blacksburg.
Yeah.
There are people, but like despite Black being in the name, it was a lot of spaces in Southwestern Virginia where I was the only Black woman in my cohort of 14 people. And we had 3 Black men, but one did not identify as Black first. He identified in his ability status first and then Black. So 3 people who openly identified as Black, and I was the only woman. And oftentimes, like with that case of Sam, I think my professor, bless her, I love this, another mentor, Dr. Claire Robbins, she was the only person to, after that conversation, be like, I feel like the class might have been painting you in a light that you weren't living in, or in this identity, because they thought I was just being aggressive towards Sam, correcting him. And other people in the class were like, well, Sam, and it's like, yeah, Sam has just got to this point, but I think it's important to not let Sam believe that that is the correct interpretation of this. And she acknowledged that, like, angry Black woman stereotype was being thrown upon me in the class, and apologized for that, but it wasn't hers to kind of bear. We are all in the same society that has built that up as a construct. But yeah, I've experienced that where I've been the most educated person in a room, and men would enter the room and shake the men's hands first, or chronologically from the doorway to the back of the room, I was first, and they would bypass me and go and shake the hands of the men, or go and shake the hands or acknowledge the white people in the room before they do. Even in meetings now, I have to be cognizant, just, aware of where I come up in the report, because just like everything, we're all in this Brady Bunch style, cube of a Zoom world. If I'm always the last person being tapped on to speak, it also makes me think like, okay, because we all shift around in squares and stuff like that, but it does kind of pique some thought in my mind. Like, I wonder if this person is conscious that and that's the piece. Sometimes you got to charge it to the head if it's intentional, or charge it to the heart, and not charge it to the heart, because not always are people trying to be intentionally malicious or things like that. But absolutely, I've been in spaces where people have just straight up walked past me.
Yeah.
And everybody else in the room, and I was the first person that they would have physically encountered. And it's interesting. I think that's the time where you decide how you're going to operate in those spaces. And oftentimes I've called people in like, hey, you realize you walked past me and spoke to everybody else in the room before you spoke to me, when I physically was the first person. And most of the time people can be like, oh, wow, I didn't notice. Cool. Do better next time. It's fine. But yeah, Blacksburg, no black people. No black people. I took one route the same way for 2 weeks and did not see anybody black along my route for 2 weeks. I said, oh, I got to stop taking this route. I just need to see somebody, black or brown. It didn't even matter at that point. It was just, I need to see some color. At Tech, but it's a 40 plus thousand person campus. The majority of the people there are not black and brown in the ways that I'm used to seeing. So I had to change it up, but oftentimes I have been the only, and it started young for me, being the only. Again, when you're smart, you get in accelerated classes, advanced classes, IB tag, still low numbers of black and brown students in those. So I'm kind of used to it, but now I'm walking in the path of like, okay, if you've done something, let me call you in, see if you realize it, and then see if the behavior changes. But
yeah, I think I go on college tours and like just walking around, there's no people of color. And I think my parents grew up in India, so they don't understand what I'm kind of talking about, but I don't know, there's some comfort in being surrounded by people that look like you, and you can, I don't know, you connect better with them. And not saying that you don't connect good with people who aren't Indian or people who aren't people of color, but there's just a certain comfort in knowing that like, oh, they did it, so I can do it.
yeah, seeing yourself in others is like the best example that I think colleges use to recruit students. Like, it is a reason why the Indian student or the Vietnamese student or the Latino student is on the brochure. It's because there is an insufficiency of white students in this environment. It's because they want those students who are interested, who identify with those backgrounds, to see themselves here. That leans into the you belong. We want you to belong, and that means sometimes you got to stop advertising using the same people who've always went here, who we know are going to come here, and shifting to using not just using their images, but elevating their voices and allowing them space to share their experience, good, bad, or indifferent, right? Because them sharing their experience is going to change the experience for the next student. So yeah, like, absolutely. And if schools are not hip to that, again, in education, you're just willfully ignorant at a certain point.
Right.
Yeah. So it's 12:02, and I don't know how much time. I mean, I'm sure we could talk to you all day, but you're probably have
I got like 10 more minutes if you have any pressing questions before I do have to jump off.
I don't. I do have a question though about, so I'm recording this on Zoom, and
Mhm.
so I was just wondering if you'd be comfortable if I use the recording or if I post it.
Uh, let me think about the posting but you're welcome to excerpt anything that I've said if you're doing a write-up.
Yeah.
Where are you posting it? Let me start
So
there. Where are you posting?
we have a small little YouTube channel. It's very small. I can send you the link if you're interested. It's just She Rocks World, or She Rocks the World, where we've posted like past interviews or of our past events.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. I don't want to stop anything if you feel like it'll be valuable to the next. Maybe just edit out this part. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And I might post like a little screenshot of this on our Instagram account to be like, hey, check out our YouTube video. You're okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. If you think that this will be valuable to the organization and the members, go ahead. I don't think I said anything too wild and outside, so we should be fine.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I definitely think I know I've learned a ton just talking to you and learning about your career and your journey, and just you in general. And so I think it might be valuable to other people.
Yeah, I'm not gonna stop learning. It's just, the internet is cruel, so I'm just trying to keep my peace with
Yeah.
the peace I got. So
Yeah.
be fine. This should be fine.
Yeah, no, yeah. It shouldn't be an issue. So Ashwathi, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but it was nice talking to you, and hopefully you'll see my name on a William and Mary application.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I will say. Applications do open August 1st.
Mhm.
Our deadline for early decision 1, which is binding, is November 1st. And then our deadline for early decision 2 and regular decision 2 are January 1st. So I encourage you and anybody else to apply if you think that William and Mary has the things that you want in the educational space. Also, if you're interested, our senior interviews are as rising seniors. So you are more than welcome to look at the senior interviews and take a senior interview. And it also is another way for you to put a little bit more of you, a little more jazz of you into your application, because it's also included into your application file when we get it.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, here, let me see. Let me stop the recording.